authentically requires us to actively seek opportunities to serve and show compassion to those in need, the disenfranchised, and recognizing that these acts of kindness are but essential expressions of our love for Christ and our participation in his kingdom. You know, we need to, I'm going to say, practice being kind to one another. Mhm. What they say about practice, what makes perfect. We'd be in a better state of the world if we had more kindness instead of hate. As we look at the author of this book of Matthew, it tells us that the writer of this book is Matthew, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, right? Now, he was also a tax collector by trade. That was his day job. So this book is said to be the perfect bridge between the Old and New Testament. And it tells us that the book lineage, the book of Matthew begins with a genealogy of Jesus tracing his lineage back through David to Abraham. Now, this showed that Jesus was the son of David and also a descendant of Abraham. So it goes way back. Now, as we look at our introduction for today's lesson, we see that Matthew 25:31-46, what it does, it forms the conclusion of Jesus' genealogy in a series of prophecies and parables delivered to disciples shortly before his crucifixion, which is coming up in April, right? Easter. You know, and we're going to get into about Jesus, how he spoke with folks. He was always around poor folks, wasn't he? He dealt with the rich people too, and he hung out with them for a little bit. But you can see him most of the time hanging out with the poor. Now, Jesus was known for teaching, y'all with me, lessons through parables, which are everyday stories used to illustrate moral or spiritual truths. Now, we all got stories we can tell. They ain't parables, and the majority ain't truths. It's probably something we made up or just pulled out there. So in this passage, it tells us that Jesus uses a parable to depict a picture of the final judgment. What he does, he offers those who would follow him a glimpse into a culmination of human history and the ultimate manifestation of Christ's kingdom and Jesus returning in his glory. What that does, it echoes Old Testament depiction of God's appearance, such as in Daniel 7, chapter 13 and 14 verse, where it says, where one like a son of man approaches the Ancient of Days and is given dominion over all people. He's in charge, not just some. He is in charge of everyone. Not like being a president. Now, the mention of all the angels with Christ, what it does is emphasize the cosmic scale of divine authority of this event. Now, their presence here symbolizes the ultimate divine intervention and the final judgment. Now, we know that he said in Scripture, when we leave from here and we go to heaven, we will be judged on what we did while we was down here. So we always say we need to get our house in order if we plan on making that trip to heaven, right? So Jesus' position of the throne of his glory is what it does, is it represents the culmination of kingship, prophesied throughout Scripture and inaugurated through his first coming, his death, and resurrection. Now, no one will be exempt. Y'all heard that? Don't think because you got money, you gonna be exempt. It says no one will be exempt. Every individual from every nation throughout history will stand before the king. You're gonna have to stand up there by yourself. Don't ask Brother Walker to stand with you. You got to stand by yourself and account for what you have done through your lifetime. Now, Paul declares in Romans 2:11 that writing that God, I don't want y'all to listen to this, does not show favoritism. He's an equal opportunity God. He don't care if you're black, white, red, maroon, blue, it doesn't matter. He don't discriminate. He don't show favoritism like some of the families with children tend to show favoritism to one in particular or another, which causes problems in the family. You should treat them all the same. So as we continue, again, Jesus is speaking in parables, right? Now, one relatable parable he spoke about was the act of separating sheep from goats. And it tells, you see, shepherds commonly separated sheep and goats at night or for specific purposes. Now, the metaphor represents the final division of humanity based on their relationship to Christ. You know, that's all Christ asked us, to have a relationship with him. That's all he asked. He said, what, you can come to me just as you are, right? He don't care what you look like or what kind of clothes you wear. So in ancient Near Eastern traditions, it tells us that the right side was associated with favor and blessings, while the left often represented disfavor or judgment. Don't be on the wrong side. That's all I can tell you. You see, the criteria for their separation focuses on how one's faith is demonstrated through actions, particularly in caring, y'all with me, for the least of these. Christ will establish justice and vindicate his followers. Now, since all people will face his judgment, the urgency of sharing the gospel and making disciples of all nations is very essential. That's what he said in the scripture. We all need to go out and make disciples, tell everyone about the good news about God. And then next we see the king begins giving out judgment by addressing those on his right. Hmm? His invitation echoes our understanding of salvation as a gift of grace prepared by God from the beginning of time. Now, what do we say about salvation? It's what? It don't cost nothing. It's free. Salvation is free. We don't have to pay for it. But yet we ignore it, right? Now, the criteria for this blessed invitation are then in the form of acts of commission and service. Now, these acts are presented not as the means of salvation, but rather as evidence of a genuine saving faith. And what did the scripture say about having faith? If you have faith as a mustard seed, you can do anything. Now, Jesus directly connects service to others with service to himself. When he said to the least of, he's talking about what you do to some other folks, you're doing it to him, all right? So it tells that it connects service to others with service to himself, elevating acts of compassion to acts of worship. Now, God cares deeply about how we treat the vulnerable, the marginalized, the needy, and these who are often overlooked or undervalued. You know, a lot of times, parents can tell their kids that you're not smart enough, or you ain't gonna never be anything. And they'll say, well, look at your daddy, you see how he turned out. But we must not do that. We need to encourage. It tells us here that Christ challenges his disciples to see him in everyday faces. See, this is common folks. Even if you got money, you don't flaunt it around and say, I'm so rich and I'm above you. Christ don't look at us that way. Everybody's equal. It tells us, again, that Christ challenges his disciples to see him in everyday faces, and the needy, the marginalized, urging us to engage in practical acts of love and service. You can't come to church every day and just sit there and say, I paid my tithes, and don't try to help do something for the community or for the church. You're just sitting there and coming to church for nothing. You can say all day long, I paid tithes, and I'm always at Sunday school, I'm at church, I don't miss a Sunday. But what are you doing? You're not contributing anything, right? Now the reward of the faithful presents us with a compelling vision of faith in action, challenging us to live our belief through practical love and service. Now, in serving the least of these, we are serving Christ. Such service is a hallmark of those who truly belong to God's kingdom. Now, don't y'all want to be in God's kingdom when he come back? He's coming back. Might as well get ready. Because it tells me you go in one or two places. Right? To be with him or to be with Satan. Now in verses 41 to 46, it gives a sobering conclusion to Jesus' parable. Now, after rewarding the righteous, Jesus addresses those on his left. Now we're getting down to the people on the left, right? These who are, y'all with me, condemned. It's in verse 41. It says the command to depart from him declares the reality of eternal separation from God. You know when you go up there to meet him, and if he tells you, Brother Walker, depart from me, you're in trouble. You can't stay there. The reason for this condemnation is that they failed to care for Christ in his need, meaning not caring for the least of these. We talk about the poor and the needy, right? And the vulnerable and the marginalized folks, that we didn't do anything to help them. You see, the Bible constantly portrays care for the poor, sick, and needy as fundamental and the aspects of faithful living. It's real easy. Now, James 1 and 27, what it does, it tells us, it emphasizes care for orphans and widows. And then Proverbs 19 and 17 suggests that kindness to the poor is like lending to the Lord. And then it tells us that Deuteronomy 15 and 11 commands open-handedness toward the poor and the needy. And you can't help nobody with your fist closed. Huh? You got to have that hand out there. And it tells us that Acts 4:32-35 describes how the early Christians community shared their possessions and ensured that there were no needy persons among them. Everybody had something to eat and everybody was taken care of. That's the way we used to have. You know, back in the day, I can remember back in Marion over there, and when it got cold around about November and October, they would kill hogs and butcher the hogs, and what they would do is give meat, they'd cut it up and give meat to everybody in the community. And I used to watch that. I thought that was pretty cool. They make the sausage and cracklings. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Some of us do. And you know, and I always, what used to get me is that before they did that, they would shoot the hole. And I used to just, oh man, that was so depressing. See them, they just shoot them and then start skinning. But anyway, that shows how connected the community was. They looked out for each other. And also, you couldn't get away with nothing in marriage. Everybody knows what you did before you got home. So I was always, my grandma was pretty strict. And she had that thing about respect. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. She was telling me one day, she says, did you take the trash out? And I said, yeah. She said, what you say? I said, yes, ma'am. So that respect thing was pretty imminent when I was coming up. So as we conclude our lesson, we see that the Bible warns us of serious consequences in this life and eternally for those who neglect the responsibility of kingdom living. Now, Scripture presents care for the least of these as an essential expression of genuine faith and obedience to God. Now, when the Lord returns, we want to be found as sheep, and not goats. We can find a way to care for these around us by leaning into God and using the talents we have been given. You know, a lot of us got a lot of talents, but we don't use it. So you know what happens when you don't use talent that God gave you? What he does? He takes them away. So, if you can sing, sing. If you can usher, usher. If you can pray, by all means pray. Now, it tells us that it pleases God when we do good and share with others.